Mama, please. I don't want to marry the three-headed man, Mama G replied. You foolish girl, is this how you will repay me? Go and marry the three-headed man so that my daughters too can marry. In the vibrant, chaotic city of Lagos, where dreams were made and broken daily, lived a young woman named Rachael. She was a vision of beauty, skin smooth like polished mahogany, eyes like twin pools of hope, and a smile so pure it could melt the hardest heart. But Rachael's beauty was not a blessing in the house she lived. After her mother's death, Rachael had been left in the care of her stepmother, Mama G, a woman whose soul was heavy with bitterness and envy. Mama G had two daughters of her own, Diola and Beezy, both plain in looks and sour in temper. As Rachael grew into a radiant young woman, suitors from far and near came knocking at their gate. Every time, it was Rachael's name they asked for, never once glancing at Diola or Beezy. This constant rejection festered like an open wound in Mama G's heart. Her jealousy matured into hatred, and she swore in her heart that she would teach Rachael a lesson she would never forget. One hot afternoon, as Mama G was buying vegetables in the market, she overheard whispers about a strange man who had moved into the old abandoned house at the end of their street. The market women said he was poor beyond imagination, dressed in rags, carrying a heavy walking stick, and worse, he had 3 heads. Children ran screaming when they saw him, and the bravest adults only dared to whisper about him behind cupped hands. A wicked smile curled on Mama G's lips as she listened. That night, under the dim flicker of a kerosene lamp, she called Rachael into the parlor. You will marry the man with 3 heads, Mama G said coldly, tapping her long fingernails on the wooden armrest. Rachael gasped, falling to her knees. Mama, please, I beg you. I have never disobeyed you. But this is not marriage, it's punishment. Mama G leaned forward, her eyes sharp as daggers. Exactly, she hissed. You have stolen enough suitors from my daughters. Now you will marry the man nobody wants. Diola and Beezy sat nearby, smirking and exchanging gleeful glances. No man will ever want you again, Mama G said, her voice dripping with venom. Rachael wept bitterly that night, her tears soaking her thin mattress, but no one came to comfort her. Within days, Mama G arranged everything for the wedding. There was no fanfare, no celebrations, only shame and whispers that followed Rachael like shadows. The man with 3 heads appeared at their compound on the morning of the wedding, his clothes torn and dirty, his 3 heads swaying at odd angles. The neighbors gathered, their mouths agape in horror and curiosity. Some covered their children's eyes. Others shook their heads in pity for Rachael. The marriage ceremony was performed quickly under the shade of the compound's dying almond tree. Rachael's heart was numb as the vows were read. She dared not look up at the monstrous figure standing before her, trembling hands reaching out to take hers. The officiating minister stumbled over his words, casting nervous glances at the groom's 3 grotesque heads. When the ceremony ended, no applause followed, only the distant barking of stray dogs and the murmuring of scandalized neighbors. Mama G smirked from the corner, arms folded, satisfied beyond words. Rachael followed the 3-headed man obediently, each step feeling like another nail driven into the coffin of her dreams. The man led her down unfamiliar streets, away from the slums, deeper into the city's bustling heart. They passed glittering skyscrapers and flashing billboards, a sharp contrast to the ragged appearance of her new husband. Rachael couldn't understand where they were going, but fear and confusion gripped her too tightly for her to ask. Finally, they arrived at a modest guest house tucked between towering office buildings. The man with 3 heads pushed open the creaking wooden door and motioned for her to enter. Inside, the room was surprisingly clean, with a simple bed, a worn-out wardrobe, and a table set for 2. Rachael stood stiffly by the door, unsure of what to expect. The man said nothing, only pointed to the bed as if to say rest. She lowered herself cautiously onto the edge of the mattress, folding her arms tightly around herself. The hours dragged on, each second heavier than the last. The city's sounds, the honking cars, shouting hawkers, the distant wail of a siren, seemed to mock her misery. Meanwhile, Mama G threw a grand feast back home to celebrate her victory. Finally, she crowed to her friends, that proud peacock is out of my house for good. Diola and Beezy laughed and clapped, basking in the attention they could finally enjoy without Rachael overshadowing them. The story of Rachael's cursed marriage spread like wildfire across the city. Market women clucked their tongues in pity. Taxi drivers shook their heads, telling the story to every passenger. In offices, salons, and beer parlors, everyone discussed the beautiful girl married to the monster. But Rachael, sitting in the lonely guest house, heard none of it. Back at home, Mama G could not contain her joy. She danced around the living room with Diola and Beezy, clapping her hands and laughing like a woman who had just won the lottery. Now, she crowed, now that cursed beauty is out of the way, my own daughters will shine like stars. Diola beamed, twirling in her faded yellow dress. Mother, now suitors will have no choice but to look at us, and we will choose only the richest and finest. Beezy added, tossing her braided hair proudly. Mama G nodded with a wicked grin. Of course, my darlings. You deserve only the best. Rachael has stolen enough attention. Meanwhile, Rachael remained hidden away with the three-headed man, her heart weighed down with sadness and fear. Each night, she lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if this was truly her fate. The man barely spoke to her. He simply watched her with those strange, unblinking eyes, 3 pairs of them, and moved about silently. Rachael was too terrified to ask him anything. She cooked simple meals from the few groceries left in the room, placing the plates carefully before him. He ate quietly, almost respectfully, and never raised his hand against her. That small kindness confused her heart even more. Could a monster truly have manners? She wondered in the dark. On the outside, he was fearsome, dreadful. But deep inside, Rachael sensed something different. Not long after Rachael was forced to marry the strange man, visitors finally started arriving at Mama G's house. Well-dressed young men, some with fancy cars, others from respected families, came knocking at her door. Mama G's heart swelled with pride as she hurried to welcome them, imagining the riches and prestige that would soon be hers. Diola and Beezy would dress in their best clothes, paint their faces carefully, and sit like queens waiting to be chosen. At first, everything seemed perfect. The suitors would smile, offer gifts, and ask politely for dates to get to know Diola and Beezy better. But as soon as they spent time with the girls, something strange always happened. The men would vanish, some after the first meeting, others after a few awkward dates. At first, Mama G thought it was jealousy from other families or a spiritual attack. But gossip traveled fast in the city, and soon the ugly truth leaked out. Diola and Beezy had terrible characters. They spoke rudely, argued over little things, showed no manners, and demanded expensive gifts as if love could be bought. On dates, Diola would insult waiters and complain loudly if her food was not exactly right. Beezy, meanwhile, bragged endlessly about her fake friends and spent the entire time scrolling through her phone, barely looking at her suitor. The men who came with hope left with disgust. Such beauty wasted by bad attitude. One man was heard telling his friends at a local bar. Another joked, "You will lose your peace of mind if you marry one of them." As the weeks rolled by, Mama G's house once again grew quiet. Meanwhile, across town, Rachael's life with the three-headed man unfolded in strange silence. In the tiny, cracked-walled apartment, she went about her days with quiet dignity. Though her heart was heavy, she refused to let bitterness consume her. She cleaned, cooked, prayed silently at night, and stayed out of the man's way. The man, in return, showed her a kind of silent respect. He never raised his voice, never tried to harm her. He would sit for hours by the window, lost in thought, while Rachael watched him carefully, wondering what mysteries his 3 heads held. There was a sorrow about him that she could not understand, a deep, soul-crushing sadness hidden behind his monstrous appearance. Days turned into weeks, and a strange peace settled over them. Not love. Not yet, but something like a fragile understanding. Rachael noticed small things. The way he never ate without offering her food first. The way he fixed the broken leg of the table quietly. The way he kept her favorite chair clean. These small kindnesses confused her heart, stirring emotions she tried hard to silence. Tonight, he decided it was time to test her heart. "You don't eat," his middle head said gruffly, his voice low and heavy. You don't smile, the second head added, eyes narrowed with concern. You are always moody, the third three-headed man concluded, the words hanging thick in the room. Rachael lifted her gaze slowly, startled by his sudden confrontation. If you want to go back to your family, the three heads spoke together, you can go. No, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I'm not going back. My stepmother. Rachael began, her voice breaking with raw emotion. She treated me like a prisoner, like an enemy. But you, she looked up at him, her eyes shining with painful honesty. You have treated me with kindness. You are not a beast. She is the true beast, hiding behind a beautiful human face. The room fell into heavy silence. For the first time, something deep inside the three-headed man stirred, a fragile warmth he had long buried beneath layers of bitterness and doubt. Rachael wiped her cheeks roughly and stood, her small figure trembling with emotion. I will stay, she said quietly. I will stay, because here I have found peace. The three-headed man said nothing, but inside, a storm of feelings raged. He turned away, afraid that if he stared at her too long, he would reveal the truth too soon. From that night, something shifted between them. Rachael began to smile again, not brightly, not foolishly, but small, sincere smiles that lit up her face like dawn creeping into a dark valley. The three-headed man noticed every little change. How she started humming when she swept the floor, how she added tiny flowers to the cracked vases, how her laughter slowly returned like rain after a long drought. He said little, but inside, he memorized every single gesture. He cooked for her sometimes, awkwardly, clumsily, and watched her face glow with gratitude even when the food tasted burnt. He repaired her broken slippers without her asking, and fixed the leaking tap with rough but careful hands. Rachael, for the first time in her life, felt cherished. Each act of quiet love chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart. Night after night, she found herself sneaking glances at him, wondering, questioning, feeling things she had been too afraid to feel before. Despite his frightening appearance, there was a gentleness in him that no handsome man had ever shown her. Without meaning to, she began to fall in love, not with a perfect face or a smooth voice, but with a soul that was patient, wounded, and real. The three-headed man saw it happening, felt it happening, but dared not act. Because he knew one wrong move, one careless touch, and the veil over his secret would fall away. He waited, he watched, and deep inside he hoped. Days turned into nights, and nights into longing. Rachael found herself drawn more and more to the man she once feared. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit beside him by the small wooden fire, their shoulders barely touching, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She found beauty in his scars, comfort in his silent presence, and love in his every unspoken word. Gradually, her fingers would brush lightly against his rough hands, and she would not pull away. The three-headed man, no, her husband, felt the trembling courage in her touch and struggled desperately to control his emotions. But Rachael was no longer afraid. One evening, while the silver moon floated high above the city skyline, Rachael stood before him, her eyes glistening with quiet fire. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched his chest through the thin fabric of his worn shirt. Her hand lingered there, feeling the rapid, almost violent beating of his heart. I don't care, she whispered fiercely, her voice thick with emotion. Even though you have three heads, I love you. The three heads stared at her in silent disbelief, stunned by the rawness of her words. I want to feel you like my husband, she said, her voice breaking with yearning. I want to feel your touch. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. The crackling fire, the chirping night insects, the heartbeat of the city, all fell into a deep, suspended silence. The three-headed man could no longer hold himself back. With a strangled sound from deep within his chest, he surged forward, dragging Rachael into his arms. She gasped, but did not resist. Instead, she clutched him tighter, as though afraid he would disappear. Their faces were only inches apart, her lips trembling, his breathing rough and broken. Rachael tilted her head upward, her eyes closing, ready to kiss him, ready to seal her fate with him, no matter how many heads he carried. And at that very moment, he could not hide anymore. With trembling hands, he reached up, and in one swift, breathtaking motion, he pulled off the remaining 2 heads. The heavy masks fell to the ground with a dull thud. Rachel's eyes flew open, and what she saw made her stagger backward in stunned silence. Standing before her was not a 3-headed beast, but one man, with skin as smooth and golden as honey under the firelight. A perfectly chiseled jawline, thick dark lashes framing burning amber eyes, a body carved like a god with rippling muscles, and a sculpted six-pack that gleamed faintly in the dim light. Rachel's hands flew to her mouth, a small shocked cry escaping her lips. Her heart hammered against her ribs, disbelief crashing through her like a storm. The man, her husband, was devastatingly handsome, beyond anything she had ever imagined. The kind of beauty that could break hearts and start wars.
He stood there, chest heaving, his real face exposed, waiting, trembling, fearing her rejection. Tears filled Rachel's eyes, her knees weakening under the overwhelming flood of emotions. "You," she choked out, barely able to breathe. "You ... The man, no longer the terrifying figure of nightmares, took a step forward, his voice rough and broken. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I only wanted to find someone who would love me, not my face, not my wealth." He reached out but stopped short, giving her space, waiting for her choice. For a long, aching moment, they simply stared at each other. 2 broken souls standing in the ruins of secrets and fears. And then, with a sob that tore from the very depth of her being, Rachel ran into his arms. She clung to him fiercely, burying her face in his chest, her tears soaking into his skin. "I love you," she cried against him. "Whether you have 1 head or 100, I love you." He held her tightly, lifting her off her feet, spinning her around as laughter and tears mingled between them. And for the first time in a long, long time, both of them were truly, breathtakingly free. That night, under the heavy blanket of city stars, Rachel and Donald sealed their love. Their bodies moved as one, slow and desperate, 2 souls finding refuge in each other after so much pain. Donald kissed away every scar life had etched into Rachel's heart, whispering promises against her skin, making her feel like the most cherished woman alive. In his arms, Rachel finally knew what it meant to be truly loved, and it was breathtaking. As the dawn crept in, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink, Donald gently stirred Rachel awake. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Come, my queen, I have something to show you." Still dazed from the intensity of the night before, Rachel wrapped herself in a simple dress and followed him out into the waking world. They climbed into a modest old car, the same one Rachel had always seen, and drove away from their little home in the outskirts. As the city grew larger around them, the roads cleaner, the buildings taller, Rachel frowned in confusion. She clutched his hand tightly, nerves prickling beneath her skin. Finally, they pulled up to an enormous, dazzling white mansion nestled in the richest part of the city. Rachel's mouth dropped open in sheer disbelief. The mansion stretched endlessly, with glittering marble floors, giant glass windows, golden gates, and sprawling gardens that seemed to whisper wealth and power. "Whose house is this?" she gasped, her heart pounding against her ribs. Donald only smiled mysteriously, stepping out of the car and coming around to open her door like a gentleman. Without a word, he took her trembling hand and led her up the grand steps. At the front door, a line of staff, dressed in sparkling uniforms, bowed low at the sight of Donald. "Good morning, Mr. Donald." They all chorused with respect and fear. Rachel nearly stumbled back in shock. Donald grinned and pulled her close, his voice gentle in her ear. "Welcome home, Mrs. Donald." The reality hit Rachel like a thunderbolt. Her husband was not just handsome. He was one of the city's untouchable billionaires. Tears of disbelief filled her eyes as he kissed her hand reverently. But he wasn't done yet. He drove her to his gleaming skyscraper downtown, a monstrous tower of glass and steel that seemed to kiss the heavens. Everywhere they walked, people bowed, whispered, pointed. Inside, the office was a palace in itself, with diamond chandeliers and endless corridors. He led her to a giant golden plaque behind the reception. It read, Donald Group of Companies, Founder and CEO, Donald Adelac. Rachel's knees went weak. Donald caught her just in time, laughing softly and holding her against his chest. "You are my wife now," he said warmly. "You are part of everything I have." Rachel buried her face in his chest, overwhelmed with gratitude and love. Still, there was one thing left to do. That very afternoon, Donald ordered his private convoy, a fleet of sparkling black cars, to drive to Mama G's house. The convoy pulled up, engines roaring, causing the entire street to tremble with curiosity. Neighbors peered out of their windows, wondering who had come with such kingly presence. Mama G, hearing the noise, hurried outside with her two daughters, Diola and Bisi, at her heels. Their mouths dropped open at the sight of the dazzling cars and the powerful men stepping out in black suits. And then they saw Donald, except now he wasn't the poor, tattered, three-headed beast they had mocked. He was a god among men, tall, handsome, dripping with wealth, authority, and grace. He wore a custom black designer suit that seemed stitched from heaven, with a gold wristwatch that gleamed in the sun. At his side stood Rachael, glowing, radiant, draped in a white designer dress that screamed luxury. Donald smiled kindly, a smile that cut sharper than a blade, and bowed slightly to Mama G. "Thank you," he said coolly, "for giving me your daughter." Mama G's face turned from shock to horror. She stumbled backward, grabbing her daughters, who looked ready to faint from shame. She tried to stammer something, anything, but no words came out. Tears filled her eyes as regret pierced her like 1,000 arrows. She had thrown away her stepdaughter like garbage, only for her to marry the greatest treasure in the city. Meanwhile, Diola and Bisi, who had once dreamed of marrying wealthy men, stood there humiliated, drowning in envy. The suitors they had long chased were nothing compared to Donald, and now Rachael had it all: wealth, power, love, happiness. Mama G fell to her knees, weeping bitterly as the neighbors whispered and pointed. But it was too late. Donald's convoy turned majestically and drove away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a broken woman consumed by her own evil deeds. Inside the car, Donald turned to Rachael, kissing her hand again. "You deserve everything good in this world," he whispered. Rachael smiled through her tears, realizing that sometimes life saves the pure-hearted and punishes the wicked in ways no one could ever imagine.